Hello to those who are joining on Zoom. Erev Tov to you. I assume it's at least evening where everyone is. It might even be deeper into the night if you're farther east. Hello to those who are joining on Facebook. And also hello to anyone who might be listening to this via the Temple Bethon podcast asynchronously, so I'm not going to guess what time it is that you're listening to it. If you're just walking in, there are text sheets available. And if anyone joined the Zoom after, you got to give it a real, there you go. There you go. If anyone joined after Rabbi Schatz put the text sheet into the Zoom, she can do it again. So just let her know if you came in after she put the text sheet into the Zoom. Okay, Rabbi Schatz, did you want to you don't need to, but did you want to say something to start this?
Give you an introduction?
Do you want to tell people who I am?
Yes, this is Rabbi Adam Kligfeld. I could give you his middle name, but we're on Facebook Live. And
I'm not embarrassed by my middle name.
Oh, I just thought it was a lot of information. And he is the senior rabbi at Temple Beth Am.
Wow.
And he's going to be teaching a class in our Elul series, which for him is a hybrid experience. And in all seriousness, next week we will be learning from Rabbi Elliot Dorff and Rabbi Rembam and Rabbi Matt Shapiro. So we hope that you will stick around for more Torah and more Elul learning. Thanks for teaching, Rabbi Kligfeld. Yeah,
and thank you for curating this whole series, allowing people to really get into the season appropriately. I want to start with a question. Our topic tonight is the topic of the whole season is we're playing with the word mechaye, giving life to, sustaining, like mechaye hametim, which we say in the Amidah, mechaye hakol, giving life to everything. We're playing with that theme in a lot of what we're offering in the high holidays. And so the title of this class is Sustaining Faith Within Doubt and Doubt Within Faith. But I want to start with a question. And this is going to be a little clunky. Hybrid is always clunky, so thanks in advance for your patience. When anyone who wants to answer the question in the room, you're going to have to pass the microphone around, otherwise people on Zoom will not hear you, and passing the microphone around will be quicker than me repeating what you have to say. The question is, what does the Misha Berach prayer for someone who's ill mean to you? If you say it or you insert a name into it, why do you say it? And what do you think is happening in that moment? If you're on Zoom, raise your digital hand. If you're in person, raise your real hand. Jen, come get the microphone. Can you face that camera this way so that the people on the Zoom can see these people talking?
When I say it, and I'm either say or I'm thinking of a name, it is a moment in time when I make sure that that person is in my thoughts and in my mind.
Okay, so it's a connection between you and the person who's ill, okay? Keep it because it's closer to there. Gary Marlise.
No, it's exactly what I was saying, but it's also something tangible I can do. I need to do something. Otherwise, I feel it's not something I can help with. But I want to try to get a connection somehow, do something. And one of the way I can do it is offer a prayer.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, it's kind of replacing the demoralization of being unable to help with a something. It replaces nothing with something. It reminds me of what some people say, the power of Shiva and the power of Kaddish is in a moment when you have no idea what to do. It gives you something to do. You have to do it. It's not that by doing it, it's magic and the person is brought back to you, but at least it's something, and it fills in the space, and it replaces nothingness. Michael, and then I saw a hand over here, then Barry, and then Carl, sorry.
I think it
Carl, keep it.
It makes the name of the person in front of the community in a sense, even though you might be saying it privately, you're bringing it to a community when you say a Misha Berach, and therefore it has greater power, I think.
Great, so it has a communitarian purpose that it actually might let people know who's sick in the community or who has someone sick in their family, and it might invite more comfort being offered. Great. Carl, because you already have the mic, and then Barry, and then Barbara. We'll have a few more.
So I was going to say too, the communitarian announcement one we already heard, don't need to repeat it. So I'll stick my neck out and say it invokes the cosmic spirit of healing and wellness, and maybe a little bit of that flows, but otherwise wouldn't.
Great. So it's interesting. It took the fifth answer to say maybe the prayer is about God, right? Maybe when we invoke the God who blessed our ancestors and we're asking that God to bring healing to our loved ones, maybe we kind of want to mean it and actually do mean it, right? Maybe that the utterance of a bracha activates the cosmic machinery and allows refuah to flow in a way that we can't fully comprehend, but is substantive and real, even if it can't be proven, right? Maybe. In which case, you might see where I'm going with this, that the utterance of that bracha might be related to kind of a sociological phenomenon in a community, or it might be related to faith in a God who can heal. Barry?
So, a similar mode. The- when I do a Mishaberach for someone, I'm a medium
Mm,
between that person's essence and the holy,
mm.
and I'm a medium for that. But going further, in the way that we now do um, sitting, someone who's died, and we have what's the group called,
Chevra Kadisha?
the Tehevra Kadisha, and we now do remote sittings. And so the person, wherever that person is, doing psalms or whatever they want to do, is acting as a medium between the Met and the holy.
Great.
And since we do allow that, and so there's something magical, we do believe this. And
Great. Right, and he used the word mate. Mate means the deceased, right? And it's great that you used the word medium, because it may have been an unintended double entendre, because you're saying that you are the medium, you're the portal through which holiness can flow. And medium is also one of the words that we have in the English language to describe people who, who have little office spaces on the corner of, I don't know, La Cienega or Orlando, saying, come in here and communicate with your deceased loved ones. And our initial reaction might be to, like, raise our eyebrows at that, and that's a little kooky, and someone's being taken for a ride. But when we participate in rituals like this, we're sort of leaning into the possibility that we serve as media, as portals through which some divine flow can be present. Barbara, last one on this.
Well, as a physician, I really don't believe that there's magic in getting people healed, except maybe through medications and surgery, et cetera. I do believe that some people, some diseases will heal themselves. But I do feel that when I say a Mishaberach, that I've already previously talked to the person about whom I'm saying this, or for whom I'm saying the Mishaberach. And I kind of hope that the ESP between me and that person is going through, and the person understands that I care about them and hope that they get better.
Lovely, right? So even if you believe as a physician that it's mostly medication and the right recipe of approaches to healing is going to do the main job of healing, you're still leaning into the notion that by uttering this prayer, there is a connection between you and the one who's ill. And by inference, let's just be logical, that would mean that by not uttering that prayer, there would be less of a connection. Right? Let's just say that out loud. I remember when my father, he should live and be well, was diagnosed with a terrible cancer. I guess it's now 20 years ago, when when Javi was pregnant with Aiden. It was a cancer that we had really no optimistic reason to believe he was going to beat more than a year. It was a new subdiagnosis of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma called mantle cell lymphoma. As a Yankee fan, he kind of liked having a cancer named for the word mantle, but as someone who wanted to live, he didn't want that subdiagnosis. And met in bell curves that that talk about the unlikelihood of certain phenomena happening. There are small numbers at the end of bell curves. They're not nothing, but they're small. And he was in the very, 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 very luckily small end of the bell curve. And 20 years later, he's alive, when nearly every person who got that diagnosis 20 years ago was dead within 3 years. And I remember he went through a terrible chemotherapy, and then an autologous stem cell transplant where they harvested his stem cells from his bone marrow and then basically eradicated his bone marrow and rebuilt it from scratch. It was the kind of treatment that almost killed him, but ultimately saved him. Why am I telling you this? He's always been a religious person. He's never had an Orthodox faith. My father was raised by a Reform rabbi. He really thinks of himself as a Reconstructionist Jew, as most conservative Jews are when they're being honest with themselves. And he never really believed in a supernatural deity. That was Mordechai Kaplan's, puncturing of conservative theology, was that our traditions are meaningful to us, and there is a notion of godliness in the world, but it's not a being that intervenes, right? Which throws into question how we understand blessing. My father, to this day, believes that in addition to his phenomenal physicians, and in addition to this chemotherapy treatment that MD Anderson came up with in Houston, and he got administered in Connecticut, and in addition to the stem cell transplant, 8%, I made that number up, but some significant percent of what allowed him to be alive as opposed to dead were the blessings that were said on his behalf in synagogues, in churches, and in mosques around the Connecticut area. People who knew him, who asked if they could pray for him, every time someone told him that they were praying for him, he felt buoyed. He felt his cells strengthening. What's happening in all these moments, right? We can never know for sure, but to say a bracha like that and not just feel that you are engaging in utter silliness, it requires a certain amount of faith. But to continue saying it, when saying it has not healed your loved one, to say it for the next person when the time you said it for the previous person didn't work and they died very quickly, requires you to confront a little bit of doubt. That simple, regular religious moment that nearly every shul-going Jew has a relationship with is actually right at the center of the intersection, of the, I think, healthy intersection between faith and doubt. Faith and doubt, which sometimes seem to be perpendicular to each other, I think are actually quite close to one another and require each other. What I want to explore with you for the next 45 minutes or an hour is, are faith and doubt in essential conflict or in essential harmony, intimate friends that elevate one another and refine one another? And should our religious lives, which are focused on some level on a faith in God, should those religious lives be blessedly free from the existential doubt that can plague those who live without religion in their lives? Is that one of the reasons why we choose to be religious, so we are not plagued with that doubt? Or should faith in God, which we know can so easily be pushed to the extreme and lead to absolutism and extremism and hatred, should that faith in God, which can be harnessed for very nefarious purposes, should it be tempered with healthy doses of doubt and uncertainty? Which brings me to the Barbie movie. How many of you have seen it? Raise a hand. Barbie. Really? Only 2 of you? How many on Zoom have seen it? One too many. Oh, a few people. Okay. God, I was expecting everyone to have seen it. Oppenheimer? You're just not seeing movies? Is that what's going on here? That's fine. Go out, go to the movies. It's Elul. Go see a movie. Okay. My quick thoughts on Barbie and how it connects to this theme. I did see Barbie. Yeah, I'm willing to admit it. I saw Barbie. I wore pink socks. No, I didn't. I would have, but I didn't. The Barbie moved me on some level, and to be very clear, I'm not going to talk here about a lot of the content of the Barbie movie. Not that it's not interesting or worthy or have a Jewish connection to it, but it's not what I'm getting at. It reminded me in kind of the Netflix movie from about 1.5 years ago called Don't Look Up. Did you see that with Leonardo DiCaprio? It was a movie with lots of familiar faces in it that was going right to the question of a warming climate and impending doom for our planet, and people preferring to go through their lives willfully blind rather than confront the reality. My problem with both of those movies, in as much as I enjoyed certain scenes and I enjoyed the acting and I enjoyed the cinematography and I'm moved by by the content and by the ideology on some level of those movies. My problem with those movies is that they were a little bit too on the nose, too simple, too obvious, too unwilling to allow subtlety and layers into the argumentation, which is one of the reasons why they were so darn popular. Those movies brooked no doubt. Those movies invited everyone watching it to be all in, I believe, on the ideological statements that were motivating those movies. And there's nothing wrong with ideology, and there's nothing wrong with ideology trying to save the world and trying to save humanity. I bristled at what I considered to be a certain fundamentalism, a certain faith in the principles undergirding those movies that did not tolerate, didn't permit the watcher to experience any kind of cognitive dissonance when you're dealing with issues of power dynamics and gender in society. If you're not willing to tolerate a little bit of cognitive dissonance, then you're probably approaching the issue far too foolishly. And if you're not willing to tolerate a little bit of cognitive dissonance when it comes to the state of the world and in human beings' connection to a warming climate and what we should do about that, if you are willing to allow yourself to be a fanatic about it, I think you're probably approaching it a little bit too foolishly. The thing that was powerful about those movies is that they were obvious, they were simple, and they sold. And what works in media works in religion too. I want to say something very strident that people have heard me say before in different settings. I have not a whole lot of optimism, unfortunately, that everything to which I am dedicating my life and work to, the overlap of a traditional and progressive and open-minded and generally liberal and observant Judaism will not have been for naught on some level. I don't have great confidence that in the year 2150, there'll be a lot of Jews in the world like us. I think Chabad will be doing great. And I think that the Belzer Hasidim will have 5 times as many people in their population as we do. And one of the reasons why that's the case and why fundamentalist expressions of Mormonism and fundamentalist expressions of Christianity and fundamentalist expressions of Islam are both so numerous and popular is the very reason why they are dangerous, I believe, and do something bad for the name of faith, the kind of faith living that we're all interested in. Because there is something that is compelling about unwavering faith. There's something compelling about certainty. It feels really good. I remember I spent a semester in yeshiva when I was in college. Many of you know, I had some credit before I started college. I did not go to a day school growing up. I went to public school and then a private non-Jewish school. I went to my synagogue Hebrew school and I got some private tutoring so that I could learn some Hebrew skills. And we went to shul every week. I learned how to daven and how to lane by just being in shul. But I was in my 3rd year of college and I was studying Jewish history and psychology, and I had a semester to play with, and I knew the Hebrew language pretty well, and I was a pretty educated Zionist, and I knew about Jewish ritual and life, and I'd never studied our text in the original. I'd never studied Rashi. I'd never learned a Mishnah intentionally. And so I spent a semester at a yeshiva in Israel called Yeshivat HaMiftar, sometimes referred to as Bravender's Yeshiva. It was one of the more liberal and open-minded Orthodox yeshivot at the time. And it was one of the places where I was told you could go as a proud and out conservative and egalitarian Jew. And as long as you weren't trying to impose that on them, you were their guest, that you would learn an enormous amount. You'd learn how to study the tradition. And to this day, I'm incredibly grateful to my teachers for bringing me into this sea, into this ocean. And you could be pretty comfortable, I don't mind saying, as a male, right, where I didn't have the issue of whether or not I could be counted in your own life. And I was pretty sure that I would go there a proud, egalitarian, conservative Jew, and I would leave there as a proud, egalitarian, conservative Jew, and not much else would change in my observance pattern, but I would know a lot more. There's a phrase in the yeshiva world called flipping out, right? Where you go and spend some time in yeshiva in Israel or somewhere else, and all of a sudden your behavior starts to change, right? You become very, very committed to a certain way of dressing. You feel become very committed to a certain punctilious practice of halacha, which I have no problem with. I have obviously no problem with practicing halacha carefully. You also ineluctably start moving in the direction where you question why everyone else is not doing it exactly as you are. I remember a conversation I had with my parents. I don't know if they remember this. We were driving from my cousins in Kfar Damim to Yerushalayim, and we'd just spent Shabbat there. And my parents lived and live to this day a very involved and committed and educated conservative Jewish life. They were never Shomer Shabbat and never pretended to me. I didn't grow up Shomer Shabbat. The way I describe it is that we celebrated Shabbat. We didn't observe Shabbat, but we celebrated it deeply. We celebrated all the holidays. And I remember having a conversation with them, which at the time felt so obvious to me. And when I look back at it now, I look at it with some shame. I was pummeling them. Why don't they make sure they light candles exactly when it's time to light candles? And how do they permit themselves to drive to shul? And why hasn't my father put on tefillin since the Chabadnik at the airport in Tel Aviv last got him to do it before a flight? In the moment, there was something beautiful and comforting and blanketing about the certainty I felt that my renewed faith in God was not only right for me, but right with a capital R, and therefore that anyone who was doing it differently was doing it wrong. This is one of the pitfalls, one of like a tar pit aspect of the very thing to which many of us have committed our lives to, and that is the question of how faith can invade your thinking, that you wonder if there's any room for doubt whatsoever. I think, by the way, that we have seen that in political movements in our era as well, right? There are certain political movements that on some level have become their own religions. And I want to be very clear, I think this happens all over the political spectrum. If you're certain that I'm speaking about one political expression, then I'm probably speaking about the other one, right? Or all of them. And it happens in America, and it happens in Israel, where a political ideology becomes an absolute, the representation of that ideology becomes a god, you start bowing down to it and having unerring faith in it, and having less faith in the complexity of humanity. I do think that we are witnessing that. By the way, Sam Harris, the great author and podcaster, he is an avowed and extremely articulate atheist, and I read his stuff all the time because I like reading things that push my own certainties. And he's also someone who's deeply into mindfulness and meditation. He talks about how many of the world's problematic and murderous movements have been born out of religious ideology. And when he talks about that and someone challenges him and says, what about Nazism? 20th century's most murderous ideology was Nazism. They were proudly anti-religious. They were persecuting the religious. They were a secular ideology. The way Sam Harris understands Nazism is that it was a religious movement that just didn't happen to have a supernatural god. Their god was Hitler. But there's no difference in the mechanics of requiring fealty and convincing the adherents that they're right and everyone else is wrong, and being willing to die and being willing to kill. You're only willing to die and you're only willing to kill others, infidels, for something if your faith has no doubt. When your faith has no doubt, it's wonderful for you to go through life that way. It's often awful for almost everyone else around you. I want to spend some time figuring out whether faith and doubt can be compatible. And maybe the reason why some people who live their religious lives think it's incompatible is because they're misunderstanding what the word and concept faith are, and they're misunderstanding what the concept of doubt is. First of all, I want to make a distinction between, and to this I'm grateful for my teacher, Amicha Goodman, the difference between having faith in and having faith that. You can substitute belief in versus belief that. when people get lost or get caught in their relationship with faith and belief, they're probably getting caught because they are on the side of faith and belief that are about creedal statements, faith that so and so is true, belief that God does so and so. And if I question whether God does this or God is that, then all of a sudden I wonder if I have any faith at all. But faith in a higher purpose for humanity, faith in the world not being an accident and there being some divine reality that is beyond our comprehension, but is worth our living our lives in service of, is a different notion than faith that. And I believe that if you're on the side of faith that, then doubt will wreck you or will end your faith, because it'll be impossible to correlate the fact that you're doubting certain faith and creedal statements when you've been asked to believe in something completely. But faith in is open-ended. Faith in is not ruined by doubt. Faith in is strengthened and thickened and elevated by doubt. With that, I want to go to the first source on the sheet. So open up the Google Doc that Rabbi Schatz gave to you. I think I'm also going to share my screen so that anyone who's watching this afterwards on the Zoom capture can actually see the text. So it means I'll see the screen and I won't be seeing all of your wonderful faces on Zoom. I'll see some of them. Okay, it's almost impossible to talk about the significance of faith in our lives without going to the 20th century's greatest prophet, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. In his 1951 seminal book, Man is Not Alone, which is really in 4 words, a wonderful distillation of his concept of faith. We'll get into his wordier explanation later. Man is not alone as a faith statement. But it doesn't say anything particular or specific about who that God is, what they require of me, and whether God requires everyone to do the same thing. That's an interesting question. That's for individual religious leaders to figure out for their own petitioners, for their own participants. But man is not alone is his 4-word way of saying, I have faith. And I have room for enormous doubts about what that means. But we're not here by ourselves. This is an extended section of that book. The whole extended section is called Radical Amazement, one of the most oft-quoted concepts of Heschel, and he refers to it in this first paragraph. I'm just going to read it. I think it's going to be easier. Normally, I would call on people. And if you haven't studied Heschel, it's rich, it's hard. Every sentence deserves an hour of unpacking. And there are a lot of sentences here, and we're not going to do them all justice, but I wanted to give you this pretty full section. The greatest hindrance to knowledge is our adjustment to conventional notions, to mental cliches. In other words, I think, once we become enslaved to easy and lazy thinking and just the way people talk about things, that's when our curiosity about the world comes to an end. On the other hand, I'm interpolating, wonder or radical amazement, the state of maladjustment to words and notions, parentheses, what a turn of phrase. Mostly we think of the word maladjustment as something we do not want to be in relationship to something about, right? He is saying you must have a certain maladjustment to all these normalized and secularized and rendered banal words and notions in order for you to have a sense of wonder and radical amazement in the world. So radical amazement, the state of maladjustment, intentional, wholly maladjustment to words and notions, is therefore a prerequisite for an authentic awareness of that which is. Standing eye to eye with being as being, English with Heschel's 5th language. Amazing what he did in English. Standing eye to eye with being simply as being, raising being up as the loftiest of notions, we realize that we are able to look at the world with 2 faculties. With reason, I'll add, the kind of reason that makes us question and doubt and rethink and be uncertain. We need that. And with wonder. Through the first, we try to explain or adapt the world to our concepts. That's a good thing. That's how science develops. That's how relationships have a chance of lasting. We're trying to use our mind to make the world make sense in a way that comports with our understanding of reality. Through the second, wonder, we seek to adapt our minds to the world. So it's the opposite process. Wonder is, this is the world. This is what I have been gifted with. How can my minuscule pusillanimous brain behold it a little bit? That is wonder. The doubt, that part of the reason in the first part of the process, doesn't undo the wonder and the faith in the second part. They're just happening all the time in our one little mind. Wonder rather than doubt is the root of knowledge, which again is an interesting turn of phrase because we would normally think that doubt and curiosity is what pushes us to inquiry and knowledge. And he's not putting down doubt. He's just making a distinction between doubt and wonder, and I'm using wonder as a stand-in for faith and belief. Wonder rather than doubt is the root of knowledge. How? In other words, the business of doubt is one of auditing the mind's accounts about reality rather than a concern with reality itself. Doubt comes in not when I'm trying to actually learn more about what is real, but trying to figure out where is the gap between what I currently think the world is and what it actually is. And if I go down that rabbit hole, I'm obviously going to get to some dead ends and I'm going to be in doubt. And there's nothing wrong with that. It deals with the content of perception rather than with perception itself. And the content of perception is significant because that's the way a human being deals with the world. But it's one step removed from perception itself. And his understanding of perception is simply, but it's not simple, perceiving the world as it actually is. That is the aspect of wonder or of faith. First, we see. We take things in, we discern. Next, we judge. Once we see something, we judge something about it. And we form an opinion, and thereafter we doubt. In other words, to doubt is to question that which we have accepted as possibly true a moment ago. You can't doubt if you didn't start with certain principles that you thought were true. I thought X was true. Now I'm wondering if X is true. Therefore, doubt comes after knowledge. Doubt is an act of appeal, a proceeding by which a logical judgment is brought from the memory to the critical faculty of the mind for re-examination. Accordingly, we must first judge and cling to a belief in our judgment before we are able to doubt. But if we must know in order to question, if we must entertain a belief in order to cast doubt upon it, then, oops, I didn't adjust the screen, then doubt cannot be the beginning of knowledge. It's an elegant little proof that he did, right? That doubt cannot be the beginning of knowledge because in order to doubt, you already had to have knowledge, which means don't rely on your doubt to be the thing that opens you up to the beauty of the world. There's nothing wrong with doubt, but that's not where learning begins. Doubt is your testing what you've learned. You have to be in a different mind frame to doubt than to be in the mind frame of faith or belief or true openness. Wonder goes beyond knowledge. We do not doubt that we doubt, but we are amazed at our ability to doubt, amazed at our ability to wonder. He who is sluggish will berate doubt, right? You might think, and I think he might be using sluggish here in the sense of someone who's spiritually sluggish. And I'll use very colloquial terms. If you think you're very frum, but you're not really willing to think hard on what your religious reality is, you might think that doubt is a terrible thing. I have no space for doubt. My community has no space for doubt. My yeshiva has no space for doubt. My religious life has no space for doubt. And my tzitzis has no space for doubt. That's sluggish thinking, no matter how particular you are about your hechshers. He who is blind will berate wonder, right? In other words, if you are saying that wonder has no space because all you are is a rational person who judges and doubts, then you're actually blind to what the world has to offer. Doubt may come to an end. Wonder lasts forever. Wonder is a state of mind in which we do not look at reality through the lattice work of our memorized knowledge, right? Kind of rote memory. Heschel had an encyclopedic command of the rabbinic literature. but he didn't rely on that. That wasn't, those were the accoutrements to his faith. But his faith was something enormously bigger than that. The lattice work of our memorized knowledge, that's impressive. You have to know the tradition to be able to wield it. But that's not what wonder is, in which nothing is taken for granted. Spiritually, we cannot live by merely reiterating borrowed or inherited knowledge. Boy, do we do that all the time. And that happens more in a firmer zone where it's considered to be a triumph to repeat by heart what Rashi said 1,000 years ago. I love studying Rashi. I love having Rashi break open a verse for us. But it's not the apex of religious life to know Sforno's commentary on the Torah by heart. But in some parts of the religious world, it's been upended, and that becomes the apex of a life of faith, not according to Heschel. It will tell you only nothing is taken for granted. Each thing is, sorry, I skipped a line. Inquire of your soul, what does it know? What does it take for granted? It will tell you only no thing is taken for granted. Each thing is a surprise. Being is unbelievable. We are amazed at seeing anything at all. Amazed not only at particular values and things, but at the unexpectedness of being as such, at the fact that there is being at all. The paradox here is that the religious life can be a veil, can occlude the thing that religious life is actually trying to get us to. Religious life and observance and building a sukkah and shaking the lulav and preparing our home for Shabbat, which are things that I all believe in all of them. They can be the portal to our religious life and the obstacle that's getting in the way of our actually living a life of faith. Because since we're focusing on these particulars, what we're not focusing enough on is, I'm alive and that's extraordinary. That's a faith statement. Those of you who come to Daily Minyan or come to Shul on Shabbat or love hearing Avinu Malkeinu on high holidays, I'm not poo-pooing any of those experiences. But how many times are those experiences lifting you off the page, getting you to a place of wonder simply about being? Not wonder about how nice that tune is, how great the harmony is, how sitting in the round really changes the davening, right? Wonder simply at being. If we're not getting to wonder simply at being, then we're not allowing faith to operate on a level that it's supposed to according to Heschel. And we're misunderstanding what faith is, which is why we might think that it is incompatible with doubt. Now, that was chunky and thick, and let me pause for a second for comments and reactions to what Heschel said and what I said about what Heschel said. Irv, let's take the microphone.
Yeah, I want to take us back to the first thing what you said about the Misha Beirach.
Okay.
What it gave me, and it relates to this, is a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for people who show up to the Minyan. It's one of the reasons why I come. I went through 2 Kaddishes, my dad and mom. People were there for me, I'm there for them. So if you look at that gratitude, I have gratitude of the washing machine, because I learned what it takes when you don't have a washing machine by reading Caro's book. I never experienced it, explaining how the people in the hill country spent hours and hours just washing clothes and suffering to do that. So when it washes my clothes, I have gratitude. So it's the gratitude, I think, that changes the need for looking at the minutia of what constitutes a religious life to what it's supposed to be.
Wonderful. And Irv, I'm thrilled that some or maybe even many of your experiences in prayer open you up to that. It doesn't happen for everyone. It doesn't happen to be every single time, right? But if it happens some of the time, that's a pretty good batting average. Other hands in the room, Barbara?
This takes me back about 65 years to what was the most significant sermon that I ever heard. It was on Yom
The
Kippur.
most significant sermon you ever heard was not in the last 14 years?
Nope, not at all. Sorry about that. It was Rabbi Saul White in San Francisco at Beth Sholem. His son is actually a classmate of Joel Rembaum's from rabbinical school. And the sermon was titled about, do you have to believe or is faith enough? And this whole thing takes me back to that. I mean, I was a 20-year-old college student or 22-year-old, medical student. I don't know exactly which year it was, but it was a long time ago. and it was really important to me because he stated you don't have to believe something. As he said, scientists can't believe something they can't see. But having faith, you can have faith that there is a God. You can have faith in things that have gone on in the world, but you don't have to necessarily believe what you can't see. And that's okay. And this really takes me back there and makes me feel good.
Thanks, Barbara. Anyone else on Heschel before we pivot? Yes, Kathy. Can someone bring Kathy the microphone? Jennifer, you're getting your steps in today.
I think having faith that, or having a feeling that something connected, had in several ways for me. And one, Barbara was talking about going back. When my grandmother was sick and I went to see her in the hospital and I went home, I knew something, it was going to be soon that she was gone. And that night we got a call, and I was in the den and I got the call. That feeling of, why did I go to see my grandmother that day? She wasn't conscious. I mean, she was conscious, but she didn't know anybody. Why did I do that? And it happened at the right time. When I was teaching in Madeira at a non-Jewish area in high school, I was a high school teacher. I went to shul 3 times on Friday night. The first one, the women said, come back, we have men. You'll see them. The second one, nobody was there. I said, okay, I'm gonna give it one more time, Hanukkah night. I met Barry. What, no, you know, there's something beyond me. That's the faith I have in.
Yeah.
You know, as teenagers, it was like, there's no God, but everything around us is God. I don't know if it's everything around. I don't know. There is something beyond my understanding of why things happen.
Yeah.
And I guess that curiosity, that wonder, will I ever get to know any of that? Will it be after? That's what I think keeps my faith and the traditions of doing keeps me tied to being able to continue wondering
Yes.
without having Shabbat, without having community. Would I ever think about it again? I don't know. I mean, if I didn't have the community, would I have met, so it's tied to that faith in, and faith that is the amazing part.
That's wonderful, Kathy. Right. So you're positing that faith is a more universal human experience, and religion is a particular expression of it, the thing that keeps you in the game. Right. So, right. I have faith that man is not alone, that there's something beyond me, and I commit as a result of that faith to a certain set of practices that I've inherited, that I could have inherited a different set of practices depending on where I was born and who raised me. And that is the particular way I act out a life that might keep me in a faith relationship, right? And I've shared this many times. It's very similar to what monogamous human relationship is, right? I have faith that there's something called love, which is a grander way of living than if you lack it. And I've chosen a particular person to bestow that love upon and to receive it from. Might I doubt that there might have been someone else in the world with whom I also could have shared that? If I don't doubt that, I'm lying to myself or to you. But my commitment is to express it in this way with this one person, so that hopefully the notion and the feeling of love will continue to be present in my life. There are a lot of associations between faith and with love. And it also talks about, I've been thinking a lot recently about my relationship to Elohei Yisrael and Am Yisrael, the God of Israel and the people of Israel. I don't have any doubts about Am Yisrael, about the people of Israel. I have doubts about where we're going and our status. I don't have any doubts that we're real, that we deserve to exist, that we deserve to have our lives and our rituals, that we deserve to have a state where we are the majority. I have questions about what transpired in the desert in between Egypt and Canaan, such that the people of Israel became wedded to the God of Israel. But I have no doubt that our ancestors who lived in the land of Canaan 3,000 years ago were actually our ancestors, and they bequeathed to us a set of practices, and that we are part of that nation. I have enormous doubt about Elohei Israel. I'm a rabbi, I daven, and I'm a teacher, and I'm committed. I have enormous doubt about who, what, where, why, once I start thinking of a God of a particular people, or the God that we have named, that we believe is the God of the entire world, but we have a special relationship with. It's possible, I believe, to live with utter faith and conviction in being attached to the tribe and the nation and the people who have expressed their religious life through a faith that is sometimes present and sometimes shaky in the God of Israel. And those two things can coexist. And I think that kind of healthy doubt is a bulwark against fundamentalism and against absolutism. And sometimes I wish that more people, just wait for 1 second. That's okay. She's trapped. It's okay, it's okay. Okay. A phone was going off in the room. It's okay, it's okay. Thanks, Raul. Right? And I wished that more people who waved the banner of faith evinced more doubt to make room for others who don't live lives exactly as they do. And having said all of that, I do want there to be a notion of God in my practice. I want to simultaneously divorce God from my practice and fill my practice up with God. Why do I want to divorce God from my practice? Because they're different things. God is my faith that I'm not alone. Practice is my way of expressing that I have a commitment as a Jew. They're connected, but they're not the same thing. I want to divorce it so that I never think that when I'm doing a particular halachic act, I'm doing it because God wants me to do it that way, and God doesn't want anyone else to do it differently. I want to divorce God from my practice so that I don't become haughty. I don't become judgy, even though I have to make judgments all the time about what our synagogue permits and prohibits. I want to divorce God from practice so I'm never willing to harm someone for my practice or berate someone for their practice. And I want to infuse my practice with God so that I'm not just a member of a club and I'm not just a member of a team that decided what its own rules were, and that my expression of Judaism and my ritual practice can have something lofty attached to it. I had this conversation, debate, machloket argument for months and months and months with one of my teachers, Professor Moshe Benovitz, who's a professor of Talmud and Halacha at the Schechter Institute in Jerusalem, where I studied for a year as part of my rabbinical studies. Incredibly knowledgeable man and gifted teacher, grew up in the Orthodox community in Riverdale, New York, made Aliyah, and I don't think he doesn't really care about denominational labels, but for all intents and purposes, he lives as a very observant, egalitarian Masorti Jew and teaches at the Conservative Rabbinical School in Jerusalem. I remember walks up and down Jerusalem where we talk about this, where I would say, you know, Moshe, when I put on tefillin, and when I kiss the mezuzah, and when I figure out if this is kosher or not kosher, and when I check to make sure 3 stars are out before doing Havdalah, I have no idea if behind any of that there's a God who expects that of me. But I'm still willing to do it, and I want to do it, and I'm driven to do it, and it's a magnet for me to do it because it's the only way for me to stay in the conversation about whether or not there's a God in the world. But I don't know if those moments God is listening. And Moshe would get angry at me not really angry, but like, in a battle with me, he would say for him, it's all about God. Why do it, Adam, if it's not God? Why get up and go to Minyan if God doesn't want you to? Why be committed to a certain limited practice if there's not some divine plan that you are acting out? We had this machloket 27 years ago, 26 years ago, and I'm still in the midst of it. And I think that's a good thing, because I think that's a thing that keeps you in a rhythm of practice that connects you to your to your people, and keeps the question of God alive in your mind without allowing you to slip into problematic certainty. Look at the next sources. This is Masechet Brachot, the first tractate of the Talmud, page 32b. V'amar Rabbi Chanina said, it's an oft-quoted line, but it's not often quoted what comes after this line. Hakol bidei shamayim chutz mirat shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven, which is Talmud speak for everything is in God's hands. Chutz mirat shamayim, except for fear of the heavens, which is Talmud speak for fear of God. It's a lot in 6 words. It's basically saying God is omnipotent. God foresees the future. God controls the world. There's one thing that God doesn't control, that God can't control. And what is that? Whether or not you believe in God. It's a fascinating construction, right? So the God is the most powerful being in the world and the most powerless being in the world. The most powerful being in the world because God controls everything except your ability to know or to say whether or not God is in the world. And if you don't know or say that God is in the world, then is God really in the world? The Talmud, I believe, is struggling with some of the questions that we're dealing with today, and trying to figure out how you exercise your human faculties to bring yourself to the faith in the very God who controls everything except your faith in that God. Shenemar, as it says, a quote from the 10th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, V'ata Yisrael ma Adonai Elohecha shu'el mimcha me'imach ki im lira. It says, now God says, now Israel, what is it that God asks of you except for awe or fear, which is understood syntactically to mean the only thing God is asking of you is faith. Everything else God controls, right? So that's not really what the verse means in context, but that's what it means in the Midrash, right? That is if to say there's only one thing that you really need to do to exercise your religious life that God can't control for you, and that is whether or not you believe in God. That's the proof text that Rabbi Chanina uses. Okay, then the Talmud has a really interesting conversation on that. Atu yirat shamayim milta zutartahi? Is fear of heaven, which is another way of saying faith, such a small thing? What does that question mean? The question is responding to the part of the Talmud that says there's only one thing that God asks of you, and that's having faith in God. Talmud says, well, that's a pretty big one thing. Is faith in God such a small and minor thing that it could be the one small thing that God asks of you? Bahama Rabbi Chanina, but that same Rabbi Chanina said, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Ein lo l'hakadosh baruch hu bebeit gnazav ela otzar shel yirat shemayim. The thing that mostly fills God's supernal storehouses of great holy stuff is the fear of heaven. This teaching by Rabbi Chanina suggests that the fear of heaven is extraordinary, is grandiose, is the biggest thing in the world. It's the thing that fills God's storehouses. So how could it be the thing that fills God's storehouses if God's in control of it, and the one thing that human beings actually control? The proof text, Amar Yirat Adonai Hi Otzaro, a verse from Isaiah, that the fear of God, that is God's treasure. The word Otzar can mean treasure. It can also mean storehouse. That's how the pun works in the Talmud. And then the Talmud responds to its own question. Is it possible that the question was that the fear of God could be such a small, minor, middling thing when the Talmud elsewhere says that it's the biggest thing in the world? Yes. It's very problematic that the word the letters Aleph, Yud, Nun mean yes and no. Ein means no, ein means yes. Took me a long time in yeshiva to figure that out. Ein, yes, it's true. Legabe Moshe milta zutartahi. Moses is the one speaking in that verse in Deuteronomy, and Moses was a paragon of faith. Moses had great Yirat Shamayim. So for Moses to speak about faith, he could say, there's only one little thing that God is asking of you, and that's having faith in God. That shouldn't be so hard. Because for Moshe, it wasn't so hard, at least according to the rabbinic imagination of who Moses was. Da'amar Rabbi Chanina, because again, Rabbi Chanina said, so he's getting a lot of play here, Mashal Adam, this can be compared to a person, Shemivakshim mimenu kli gadol. Someone asks a person for a great vessel, a huge vessel. V'yeshlo, well, the person has it. Dume alav kechli katan. That seems like a small request. If I ask you for $50 and you only have 10, I'm asking you for an enormous, impossible thing. If I ask you for $1,000 and you have 2 million, it's nothing, right? If I'm baking a cake and you're my next door neighbor and I need 3 eggs and you only have 2 and you are going to use at least one of them for your own cooking, then my asking you for 3 eggs is an enormous thing. But if you have an egg farm and you have more eggs than you know what to do with, then my asking you for 3 eggs is a nothing. And then the Talmud continues, Katan de'elo, but if you ask somebody for something small and they don't have it, dome alav kechli gadol. It's as if it's a great and large vessel. In other words, to Moshe, for whom faith was abundant, having a little faith is not a big thing, it's a small thing. To us, it's an impossible thing. It's the grandest thing that we can possibly imagine. It's the thing that we have a taste of it, a whisper of it. Our lives feel bigger and elevated for that moment, and then it's ephemeral and it's gone because we do not live on the level that the Talmud imagines that Moshe lived on. I think this is the Talmud's way of saying that faith is critical and faith is impossible. Faith is accessible and faith is inaccessible. Believing in God is the only thing that God asks you to do. Believing in God is an impossible thing to do. Believing in God is the central way of being a Jew. Don't feel so bad if you have a hard time believing in God because not everyone can get to it. So go do a mitzvah instead. Our spiritual ancestors were grappling with this. And when the work of our spiritual ancestors is reduced in such a way that suggests that having unwavering faith in God and that unwavering faith in God pushes you to an unwavering Jewish practice, I think that is a limiting, a minimizing, and maybe even a bastardizing of what our forebears really wanted from our Jewish lives. We did Heschel, we did Talmud. I want to finish with a Christian theologian, Philip Yancey. He's an author, theologian. I had not come across him until recently, and he's got a lot of interesting things to say about faith and doubt. And even though his practice of religion is different than ours, right? That's fine. He doesn't celebrate Purim. I don't celebrate Ash Wednesday. His ruminations about faith for a religious person are evocative and accessible. And why should we not listen to and learn from someone whose particular expression of religion differs than ours, but who's wondering about the very things that we're wondering about, the very wondering that makes us want to stay religious? We have something to learn from. Inquisitiveness and questioning are inevitable parts of the life of faith. Parentheses. Some people I meet in the conversion process say the reason why they fled Christianity and came to Judaism is because they believed they were confronting a Christianity that was not permitting of inquisitiveness and questioning. So I think Philip Yancey is a particular kind of Christian theologian, and I'm obviously attracted to him, but it's not necessarily the dominant theme in evangelical Christianity or even with Roman Catholicism. Where there is certainty, there is no room for faith. That should be, I'd like that on my tombstone, if any of you are around when that happens, right? Because it's pushing against the orthodoxy, and I'm using that term with a double entendre, that faith requires certainty. Where there is certainty, there's no room for faith, because if you're certain about something, then I don't need to have faith that there's gravity. I'm certain there's gravity, right? I don't need to have faith that 1 and 1 equals 2. I'm certain about it. So I want my certainty to be in different realms than my faith. I encourage people not to doubt alone, rather to find some people who are safe doubt companions. Hello, here we are, right? You're all coming out of the closet tonight. And also to doubt their doubts as much as their faith. Lovely turn of phrase. But it doesn't help simply to deny doubts or to feel guilty about them. Many people, after all, have been down that path before and have emerged with a strong faith. In other words, your doubting relationship about the God around whom and around whose laws you are organizing your life, your doubting does not necessarily mean that you are inevitably leaving the path and leaving the community. It actually might be that through that doubt you get to what some of I think it's Tillich calls the second naivete, right? A renewed understanding of what a faith relationship in that God can be. Sometimes the faith is stronger on the other side of doubt. I see faith not so much as an intellectual assent to a series of concepts, faith that, but as a relationship with a living God, faith in. Feelings deeply affect every relationship. For example, I've been married for decades. Name any feeling, good or bad, and I've probably had that feeling toward my wife. Yet the commitment to marriage binds me to her regardless of the feeling of the moment. This, I think, is what Kathy was saying before about God and her commitment to religion. I confess that there are also times where I have to act as if I love her when the feeling lags. That's normal, I believe, in any long-term relationship. I tell every wedding couple that I work with that if I only put on tefillin in the mornings that I woke up replete with the faith in the creator of the universe and the God of Sinai, I'd put on tefillin occasionally, not every day. If I only kissed my children in the moments that I was overflowing with tender compassion for them, they would be emotionally malnourished, right? Sometimes we rap and sometimes we kiss a mezuzah and a child and a spouse and a friend in order to reawaken the feeling and the faith that was there recently, but I can't find it in this moment. But maybe by acting in that way, I will bring it back. We looked at how, and we'll end with this, how in the Talmud in 2,000 years ago and in Heschel last century and in Yancey this century, there seemed to be a healthy tug of war or dance between faith and doubt. I think it goes back even to the Tanakh. Many of us know Psalm 23, right? The psalm that we say at funerals, the psalm that calms our doubts, the psalm that makes us feel that with God next to us, we are lying in green pastures. Adonai, ro'i lo echsar, God is my shepherd, I shall not want, I'm protected, I'm taken care of, God is there, I'm not alone, I have someone to rely on, the footsteps poem, etc. That's Psalm 23. Look how Psalm 22 begins. Previous psalm. Eli, Eli, lama azavtani. My God, why have you abandoned me? I'm all alone, God. Rachok miyeshuati divrei sha'agati. You're so far from my feeling your power to deliver me. You're so far from my roaring. Lish'og is the sound that a lion makes. Divrei sha'agati. How could that be? That simultaneous, that consecutive psalms are representing the utter presence of faith and the utter absence of it. The sense that with God I can never be alone, and the sense that I'm trying so hard to feel God and you're not there. I don't think it's an accident that Psalm 22 comes just before Psalm 23. And although I understand why we quote Psalm 23 more, because it feels good to utter it and try to imagine the person who wrote that psalm and feel maybe we can attach ourselves to that faith, we might feel more of a connection to the author of Psalm 22, who wandered around the world wondering, is there a God? I know Shabbos is coming, but is there a God? I have to shop for Pesach, but is there a God? The Chanukiyot need to be cleaned out because they're still waxing it from last year, but is there a God? It's okay. And as we enter into this heady season, will there be a lot of God talk and a lot of praying, a lot of trying to reach towards something lofty and a lot of focusing on things that are very this worldly, a lot of organizing meals, and also trying to enter into a spiritual realm so tshuva is possible. Allow yourself to believe, allow yourself to question, allow yourself to have faith in, and allow yourself to doubt, and allow them to dance with one another. Shana Tova. I didn't see that someone wrote a message. Oh, yes. Correct. Thanks, Annalise. It's late for everyone, so let's continue this conversation over the next decade. How about that? Laila to everyone. Good night. Shana Tova. See you soon.